For 7 years he toiled in silence, buried in the earth, his hands scraping at the cold stone, inch by inch. The world above him moved on, unaware of the quiet struggle unfolding beneath their feet. In a place where hope had long since abandoned its residents, he had a single, unwavering dream: escape. What he didn't anticipate was the friendship he would forge in the darkest depths, or the redemption that awaited him, not just in freedom, but in the revelation of his own strength. It wasn't just a tunnel he was digging, it was the embodiment of his will to survive, to change his destiny, to rebuild what had been broken. And as the days passed, the tunnel grew, and with it, so did his resolve. But it wasn't just about escaping the physical walls that confined him. It was about breaking free from the chains within. The story of this man is one of courage, unexpected bonds, and the long road to redemption. It's a tale of how sometimes the most unimaginable friendships and the deepest transformations are born in the darkest places, where survival is measured not just by the escape, but by the strength to face what lies ahead. For 7 years, he lived in a world of stone and dirt. Every day he woke up to the same cold walls, the same dim light filtering through a small crack, offering just enough hope to keep him going. His name was William, and he had been sentenced to life in a prison that seemed less a building and more a tomb. The walls were thick, the doors impenetrable, and the guards relentless in their vigilance. He was, as many others, a man forgotten by the world. But William was not the type to accept the hand fate had dealt him. From the moment he had set foot in that cold, unforgiving place, he had resolved that he would not let it break him. The world above him, the life he had once known, seemed a distant dream, one that now lived only in the dusty corners of his mind. He often thought about the outside, the sun on his face, the feeling of the wind on his skin. But all of that seemed so far removed from him now, a memory fading in the passage of time. Every morning, as he made his way to the narrow, dimly lit cell, his hands would begin their familiar routine. It was no longer about whether he could escape. It was about surviving. His hands would ache from the work, but the pain was a welcome reminder that he was still alive, still fighting. The tunnel he had started digging years ago had become more than just a way out. It was a symbol of his resistance, his refusal to be beaten. He didn't know how far he'd have to go to break free, but he knew that if he could just keep digging, he could at least hold on to something, his dignity, his purpose. The first few months were grueling. He had no tools, no equipment, just his hands and the small makeshift pick that he had managed to steal from the maintenance room. Each night, after the guards had made their rounds, he would sneak down to the small, abandoned part of the prison, the place where no one went. And he would dig. The earth was stubborn, packed hard and tight, but his hands were relentless. Sometimes the walls of his makeshift tunnel would collapse, and he'd have to start again. But he never gave up. There was something inside of him, an ember of defiance that refused to die. The tunnel became his lifeline, the only thing he had left. As the years passed, William's resolve only grew stronger. He was no longer the same man who had first entered the prison. The solitary confinement, the harsh conditions, had stripped him of everything he had once known. But in their place, he had built something far more valuable: the courage to keep going. The courage to continue, even when it felt as though the world had long forgotten him. There were days when the weight of the tunnel seemed too much to bear. The isolation, the never-ending cycle of digging, the constant aching in his bones. It was enough to make anyone break. Yet, somehow, he didn't. There were moments when he wanted to scream, to give in to the despair that clawed at him, but he couldn't. Not because he was strong, but because he had nothing else to hold on to. The tunnel was all he had, and if he stopped digging, what would be left? Another year in that hellhole? Another decade? No, the only way out was forward. One night, as he was digging, the sound of footsteps echoed through the cold, empty halls. William froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Had someone heard him? Was this it? Was the game over? He waited in the silence, breath held, but nothing happened. The footsteps faded, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself a small breath of relief. He had learned to be patient in prison, to live in the moment, to let go of the need for certainty. The unknown had become his ally. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that if he could just keep moving forward, it didn't matter. As the years wore on, William's body grew more and more accustomed to the rhythm of the tunnel. His hands were calloused, his back sore, and his muscles fatigued, but the mental strain was what really wore him down. The endless monotony of it, the day after day, each one blending into the next. There were moments when he felt as though he was losing himself, his identity fading into the dirt. He wasn't just digging for freedom anymore. He was digging for something else, a reason to keep going, to prove to himself that he could, that he would not be crushed by the weight of his situation. But it was during these darkest moments, when his body ached and his mind felt numb, that something extraordinary happened. He met him. It was an accident, at first, a chance encounter that seemed almost impossible. William had been digging for days, the tunnel becoming a little deeper, a little longer, when he felt a presence behind him. He spun around, the hairs on his neck standing up. In the dim light, he saw him, a man standing there, looking as out of place as William himself. At first, they didn't speak. What was there to say? They were both in the same boat. Two men trapped in a world that had long since ceased to care for them. But over the next few days, their bond began to grow, silent at first, like the slow movement of the earth. It started with simple gestures, sharing what little food they had, nodding at each other in the darkness, offering silent support. And then, slowly, it grew into something more. A friendship, unexpected, born in the shadow of the tunnel. The other man, whose name was James, was different from William. He had a different past, a different set of memories. He had been a soldier, captured during a mission gone wrong. William had been an architect, someone who had built dreams with his hands before being crushed by the weight of a corrupt system. But in that small shared space beneath the prison, they became something more than their pasts. They became comrades in arms. They became brothers. Together they dug, working in sync, understanding each other in a way that words could never capture. They didn't need to speak. Their bond transcended the need for language. They understood the pain of captivity, the frustration of waiting for a chance that never seemed to come. And in each other, they found something they hadn't even realized they were searching for: hope. The tunnel was no longer just a symbol of escape. It was now a symbol of something greater, the strength that comes from shared struggle, the redemption that comes from finding someone who truly understood. But the journey was far from easy. The days were long. The tunnel still seemed endless, and every time they thought they had made progress, the walls would collapse or the earth would shift. Yet through it all, they had each other, and that was enough. As time passed, the men began to dream of what awaited them on the other side. It wasn't just freedom they sought, it was redemption. They didn't want to escape just to run from their past, but to prove to themselves that they could rise above it. To show the world that they had not been broken, that they had not been defeated by the cruel hands fate had dealt them. And then, one day, the tunnel broke through. The earth shifted, the walls gave way, and the first breath of fresh air filled their lungs. It was a moment that William would never forget. The smell of the outside, the cool breeze against his face. It was the feeling of rebirth, of redemption, of everything he had worked for finally coming to fruition. But as they emerged from the darkness, they realized something incredible. They weren't just free, they were whole. They had survived, not just the physical confinement of the prison, but the emotional and mental constraints that had held them captive. The tunnel had not only freed them from their chains, but it had freed them from the past. It had given them the courage to move forward, to face the world with new eyes. In the end, it wasn't just the bravery to escape that defined them. It was the strength to rebuild, to emerge from the darkness and embrace the light. And as they stood there side by side, free at last, they knew that no matter what came next, they had already won. They had faced the deepest darkness, and together they had found their way to the light. The world often paints survival as a solitary struggle, a battle fought alone in the darkness. But for William, the years spent in the prison cell beneath the earth were a testament to a different truth, that even in the deepest, darkest places, human connection can be a source of salvation. His was a journey not just of escape, but of discovering the profound strength that can arise from unexpected friendship. The bond he formed with James, a man who had walked a different path but shared the same pain, became the catalyst for his redemption. It was not just their hands that dug through the earth. It was their spirits entwined in a silent promise, a bond forged in the crucible of their shared suffering. William had always been a solitary man. Before prison, he had been consumed with work. consumed with ambition.
Ambition.
His world had been built on the idea that self-reliance was the key to success, that one must always stand alone to make their mark. It was a belief that had served him well in the fast-paced, cutthroat world of architecture, until the day it didn't. When everything came crashing down, when he was sentenced to a life behind bars, he found himself in a world where self-reliance meant nothing. The prison walls were unyielding, and no amount of willpower could change that. He was a prisoner, trapped in a place where survival wasn't just about escaping. It was about holding on to his humanity. At first, he had tried to keep to himself. The other prisoners seemed as broken as he was, caught in a never-ending cycle of violence, apathy, and despair. The idea of forming connections with them felt futile. They were strangers to him, people who had lived lives that were foreign, even alien to his own. He had no interest in their stories, no interest in their struggles. He had his own fight. But as time passed, the cold isolation of his cell began to eat away at him. The silence, the loneliness, it all began to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. He had dug his tunnel as a way to escape, but more and more he realized that it wasn't just the prison he was trying to escape. It was himself. And then, one fateful night, he met James. James didn't look like the kind of man William thought he'd bond with. He was older, weathered by years of hardship. His face was scarred, his eyes haunted by a past that William could only guess at. James had been a soldier before his capture, a man who had seen the worst of the world and carried those memories like a heavy burden. He was tough, yes, but beneath that hard exterior was something William hadn't expected, a quiet, unspoken empathy. Their first interaction was simple, almost insignificant. William had been working on the tunnel when he heard a noise behind him. He spun around startled and found James standing there, leaning against the cold stone walls. His expression was unreadable, but there was a glimmer of something, curiosity, maybe, or recognition. James didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked at William for a long moment, as if weighing him up, and then simply nodded. The nod was not one of greeting, but of understanding. It was as if he had seen William, truly seen him, in a way no one had in years. It was a strange, silent acknowledgement that the two of them were connected by something deeper than the walls of the prison, something that had nothing to do with their pasts and everything to do with the present. Over time, their silent bond grew. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic moments of camaraderie. Instead, it was built slowly, brick by brick, just like the tunnel they were both trapped in. At first, they only exchanged fleeting glances, the kind of look that says everything and nothing all at once. They didn't talk much, not at first. There was an unspoken understanding between them. They didn't need to explain their pain, their losses, their fears. They both knew what it was like to feel utterly alone, to be caught in a world that seemed to have forgotten them. But in each other, they found something that neither had anticipated, the quiet solace of shared struggle. What James brought to their bond was something William had never truly known. Where William had once believed in standing alone, James believed in the strength of shared experience, in the quiet power of having someone to lean on. James had seen firsthand the impact of comradeship on the battlefield, the way a single act of kindness or understanding could turn the tide of a fight. His philosophy was simple. Survival wasn't just about escape. It was about enduring together. At first, William didn't understand this. He had spent so much of his life focused on himself, on his own goals and ambitions, that the idea of depending on someone else, of allowing himself to be vulnerable, felt foreign. But as their days in the tunnel wore on, he began to realize that James's way wasn't weakness. It was strength, the kind of strength that William had never been able to tap into. It was the strength to say, I'm not alone in this, and to recognize that survival didn't mean shutting everyone out. It meant opening up, even just a little, to the possibility of connection. James's presence in the tunnel was a revelation to William, where before the work had been a solitary endeavor, something he had done solely for his own survival. It now became a shared mission. They dug together, side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging words, but always with the understanding that each was not just digging for freedom, they were digging for each other. When one of them faltered, the other was there to offer a hand, a word of encouragement, or even just a look that said, you're not alone in this. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but it was enough. In the most barren of places, in the deepest of tunnels, they had found something beautiful, an unspoken bond that transcended the walls around them. In the early days of their friendship, there were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of their shared isolation felt unbearable. There were nights when William would sit in the darkness, the sound of the pickaxe against the earth echoing in his mind, and wonder if it was all worth it. He wondered if he would ever see the outside world again, if he would ever truly escape. But in those moments, James would often speak, his voice a steady, calm presence in the silence. He would talk about his past, about the people he had lost, and about the strength he had found in surviving not just for himself, but for others. James's words were simple, but they held weight. But we don't survive because we're strong, he would say. But we survive because we find a reason to keep going. And sometimes, that reason is someone else. It was a concept that William struggled to understand at first. He had always thought that survival was a solitary pursuit, that you had to be strong enough to go it alone. But James showed him that there was a different kind of strength. It wasn't about isolation. It was about connection. The strength to lean on someone when you couldn't carry the weight any longer. The strength to offer a hand when the other person had fallen. The strength to trust that, even in the darkest of tunnels, you weren't truly alone. As their bond deepened, William began to see the tunnel differently. It was no longer just a means of escape. It was a symbol of their shared journey, a reminder that even in the most hopeless of circumstances, the human spirit could endure, could rise, and could find light in the darkness. Their friendship became the light, the spark that kept them going when everything else seemed bleak. And in that light, William found redemption, not just in escaping the prison, but in discovering a new way of living, a new way of being. The tunnel, once a symbol of his solitary fight for survival, became a testament to the power of connection, to the strength that can be found in shared struggle. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and the months into years, William realized that his fight was no longer just for freedom. It was for the friendship that had saved him, for the man beside him who had shown him that survival wasn't just about digging through the earth. It was about digging through the darkness inside. The darkness that told him he was alone, that told him he had no worth. James, through his quiet, unwavering friendship, had helped him break through that darkness. And together, they had not just dug a tunnel, they had built a bridge to the future, to a life that was no longer defined by the walls around them, but by the connection they had found in each other. When the tunnel finally broke through and the outside world was within reach, William understood something he had never known before. Freedom wasn't just about escape. It was about redemption. It was about discovering that even in the most unlikely of friendships, in the most unexpected places, there could be salvation. And as he stood beside James, looking out at the world they had fought to reach, William knew that the greatest victory wasn't the one they had won in escaping the prison. It was the one they had won in finding each other,